Hello everyone, and welcome back to Daily English Voices. I'm Mia, your host, and today we're diving into a rich listening session designed to stretch your comprehension and sharpen your speaking instincts at the C1 level. Think of this episode as a guided walk through real moments, tiny snapshots of everyday life where vocabulary, nuance, and confidence all come together. I'll carry you through stories, short dialogues, and reflective moments, while drawing your attention to the signals that advanced listeners notice: how a speaker softens a claim, how a pause creates emphasis, how a single transition word redirects the entire meaning of a sentence. By the end, you'll not only feel more attuned to natural English rhythm, you'll also have a bank of expressions you can use immediately the next time you introduce yourself, explain a decision, or encourage a friend. Let's begin with curiosity. Last Tuesday, my husband Daniel signed up for an evening pottery class at the Community Arts Center. He had never felt a lump of clay in his hands, and the idea of turning a spinning wheel intimidated him. Yet he walked in carrying a simple goal: learn how to shape a small bowl without losing it to the centrifugal force of panic. During the first 20 minutes, the clay wobbled, the rim collapsed, the base stuck to his fingers. He almost laughed at himself, then almost gave up, then breathed, then tried again. His instructor, a gentle woman named Mrs. Thompson, leaned in and said, "Anchor your elbows, slow the wheel, and let the clay tell you what it wants." Something in that sentence revealed a principle you can apply to language learning: slow the pace, stabilize your posture, and listen to what the sounds want to become in your mouth. By the end of the class, Daniel produced a bowl with an uneven lip and an oddly charming tilt. Was it perfect? No. Was he proud? Absolutely. In English we might say he took the plunge, pushed through the learning curve, and embraced imperfection. These are high-value verbs and phrases: take the plunge, push through, embrace imperfection. They help you describe a first attempt without sounding apologetic. Driving home that night, he described the experience in layers. First, he admitted the struggle, then he highlighted the moment he adjusted his technique, finally, he celebrated the small win. That sequence: challenge, adjustment, outcome works beautifully in interviews, progress updates, and storytelling. Notice the tone markers he used: at first, after a while, eventually. These small signposts guide your listener through time. If you're shadowing, try repeating a sentence like this out loud: "At first I felt clumsy and uncertain, but after a while I found my rhythm, and eventually I produced something I could be proud of." The music of those clauses matters. There's a rising and falling energy that mirrors the emotional arc. A few days later, my friend Sophia coordinated a neighborhood cleanup. The weather forecast promised sunshine, but clouds rolled in, and a brisk wind made banners flap and tape peel off the tables. Rather than complain, she rallied the team, reassigned tasks, and calmly replaced the fragile displays with sturdy clipboards and weighted signs. People began to comment on how composed she seemed, and it spread. Her composure became contagious. This is an advanced social skill: when you model the reaction you hope to inspire, others often mirror it. In English, you can frame this as set the tone, model the behavior, or create momentum. If you need to describe the shift in atmosphere, you could say, "Once Sophia set the tone, the team warmed up, and the work flowed." The phrase "warmed up" is excellent for transitions. It suggests an emotional thaw from tension to cooperation. Now picture a brief exchange at the event. "We're missing half the gloves," Olivia says, scanning the supply box. "Let's split the group," Daniel replies. "Half of us will clean the playground while the rest collect the remaining supplies from the storage shed." "Good idea," Sophia adds. "I'll notify the volunteers so they don't stand around waiting." In this tiny dialogue you hear concise decision-making: let's split, half of us, I'll notify. Native speakers rely on crisp imperatives and short future commitments to move tasks forward. When you're shadowing, compress your sentences and keep the verbs strong, then expand later with details if someone asks. Later that week, Daniel tried a new recipe from a magazine that recommended season boldly and adjust to taste. He misread the salt measurement and created a sauce that would have made a sailor thirsty. Instead of discarding the dish, he diluted, balanced, and rescued the flavor by adding tomatoes and a touch of honey. That trio dilute, balance, rescue works in speech too. When you say something too bluntly, you can dilute your statement with a softener, balance it with praise for the person's effort, and rescue the relationship by clarifying your intention. Listen for mitigation strategies in professional English. To be fair, that said, in hindsight, I might be wrong, but these expressions widen the conversation so there's space for correction without conflict. Let's test your listening with nuance. Imagine someone says, "I was skeptical at first, but the results spoke for themselves." There's an admission of doubt followed by a pivot toward evidence. The intonation typically drops on skeptical, signaling frankness, then rises slightly on results to build expectation, and falls again on spoke for themselves to underline confidence. If you repeat this sentence, try to mirror the rise and fall. Advanced English is as much about intonation as vocabulary. A single stressed word can carry the meaning of an entire paragraph. Another story. Sophia hosted an online workshop and, minutes before it started, a crucial slide deck refused to load. Participants waited, the timer ticked, and silence expanded. She took a breath and narrated the content from memory, turning the rough outline into a conversation. 5 minutes later the slides reappeared, but by then, no one needed them. The group had already grasped the concepts because Sophia's voice had created a structure. Here we find excellent verbs for your toolbelt: improvise, pivot, narrate, sustain, and reinforce. Try building a sentence around them. When the slides failed, she improvised, pivoted to discussion, narrated the key points, sustained attention, and reinforced the takeaways. The rhythm of that list builds momentum through parallel structure. Use it in presentations when you want to sound decisive and clear. We should talk about observation as a learning multiplier. Daniel attended a public speaking showcase where one presenter captured the room not with volume, but with a cadence that alternated between swift and deliberate. He used pausing as punctuation, eye contact as an invitation, and open palms as a subtle promise of transparency. Advanced listening means decoding these nonverbal cues and assigning them meaning without overthinking. Phrases like hold the room, command the space, and land a point are shorthand for complex rhetorical techniques. When you describe a speaker, you might say, "She landed her point with a measured pause," or "He held the room by slowing down when the content mattered most." Let's shift scenes. On Saturday, our neighborhood organized a charity bake sale. 2 volunteers canceled at the last minute, the sign-in table clogged with friendly but confused customers. Daniel walked to the front and said, "Let's create 2 lines, one for payments, one for pre-orders. I'll handle the receipts, can someone verify quantities?" Within minutes the traffic problem dissolved. Notice the microstructure of his suggestion. He framed the problem, proposed a simple architecture, and assigned roles with confidence but without arrogance. If you're practicing leadership language, rehearse small, specific verbs: verify, allocate, confirm, consolidate. They sound professional without being showy. After the sale, we took a slow walk beside the river. Daniel described his new hobby, cycling, and admitted he had misjudged a hilly route the previous weekend. Midway up, he experienced that tight, urgent doubt that makes the brain bargain: maybe turn back, maybe stop now, no one will know. But he negotiated with himself: slow down, shorten the goal, just reach the next lamppost. He told me, shrinking the target made the climb possible. In English, describe this technique as breaking the task into manageable steps or narrowing the focus under pressure. The adverb deliberately pairs well here. He deliberately reduced the challenge to hold momentum. That night, Olivia sent a message about her coding study group. The material had outpaced her comfort zone. Classes jumped from simple loops to asynchronous patterns that tangled her thoughts. Rather than quit, she formed a micro-team, set a shared study schedule, and created a rolling document of questions with color-coded answers. This is collaborative scaffolding. You build mental handrails together until the stairs feel safe. Academic and professional English love metaphors like scaffolding, bandwidth, bottleneck, and roadmap. Use them to describe complex processes in friendly terms. Our bottleneck wasn't motivation, it was unclear documentation. Once we built a roadmap and added scaffolding, progress accelerated. Now, a listening exercise. Consider the sentence: in theory the plan seemed airtight, in practice the timelines collapsed. The contrastive structure in theory/in practice demands that you hear the pivot and register the implication. Plans often fail not in design but in execution. Your job as a C1 listener is to notice the hinge phrase and infer the subtext. Someone underestimated variables, or the resources were insufficient, or communication misfired. If you repeat this sentence foreshadowing, exaggerate the pause before in practice to signal the turn. The following week, Sophia traveled to a regional conference. She expected direct, American-style feedback in breakout sessions, but discovered a more layered, indirect style in which suggestions were framed as questions. Have you considered? Would it be helpful if? The content was rich, the tone was diplomatic. High-level English requires sensitivity to these frames. When you give feedback across cultures, you can soften a recommendation without weakening it. One option might be to adjust the timeline, or it could be worth exploring a smaller pilot. The modal verbs might and could carry respect while leaving room for the other person's judgment. Back at home, Emma organized a surprise party and learned the secret art of contingency planning. She reserved a park pavilion, prepared a playlist, and distributed responsibilities. Then, because experience had taught her humility, she also printed directions to an indoor backup location and kept umbrellas in a basket by the gate. Of course the weather changed, and of course her preparation saved the event. If you want to sound gracefully competent in English, weave in phrases like built-in redundancy, plan B, risk mitigation, and seamless transition. When the rain arrived, we executed a seamless transition to the community hall. Sounds precise without sounding mechanical because the verbs are light and the nouns carry specificity. Let's listen to a compact dialogue at the moment of the pivot. Rain's picking up, Daniel says, peering at the clouds. We'll switch to the hall, Emma replies. Text the guests the new pin, and I'll redirect the caterer. On it, Sophia nods. I'll put a sign at the pavilion. 4 lines, 4 actions, no drama. The brevity communicates control. Practice stripping your English of unnecessary filler when decisions are time-sensitive. Later you can add warmth and detail. During quieter hours, Daniel has been learning photography. He discovered that changing perspective, kneeling to capture a child's eye level, stepping back to include negative space can transform an ordinary shot into something that breathes. He told me, it's not always about adding more, sometimes it's about removing what distracts. There's a powerful speaking lesson in that. Many learners default to cramming a sentence with adjectives to sound sophisticated. Resist that. Prioritize verbs and concrete nouns. Remove what distracts. If you need a phrase to anchor this idea, try clarity over ornament or precision over embellishment. A week later, our community prepared a tree planting day. Confusion crept in when tools ran short and the map of assigned plots wasn't printed. Daniel climbed onto a low wall and raised his voice just enough to carry without shouting. Team A will share shovels with Team B, he said. While you wait, remove stones and loosen the soil by hand. We'll rotate every 10 minutes. This is resourceful leadership. Acknowledge a constraint, offer a temporary workaround, and set a simple timer to prevent frustration. In professional contexts, frame constraints without dramatizing them. Given our current bandwidth, we'll rotate responsibilities in 10-minute intervals to maintain momentum. We should address confidence because listeners often ask how to sound credible when they still feel shaky inside. One technique is verbal anchoring. Start with a clear, declarative sentence, follow with a story, then end with a precise call to action. For example, consistency drives improvement. Last month I practiced short daily monologues, and my fluency jumped dramatically. Try recording yourself for 2 minutes every morning, just 2 minutes, and watch your progress compound. The structure claim, evidence, action persuades gently, and the time-bound assignment lowers psychological resistance. Let's shift to self-correction. Daniel recently built a small bookshelf and cut one leg slightly too short. He could have started over, but he decided to sand and shim until the piece stood level. In speech, that shimming process might look like this: I meant to say quarterly, not monthly, or, let me rephrase, what I'm suggesting is a phased rollout. Quick, humble corrections signal maturity, and they prevent misunderstandings from calcifying. If you're shadowing, practice the cadence of a clean correction, keep your tone steady and your breath even. Now, a story about creative constraint. Sophia designed greeting cards for a fundraiser and limited herself to a 2-color palette plus recycled paper. The constraint made her more inventive. She played with negative space, line thickness, and asymmetry. In English, this approach can be described as designing within parameters or leveraging limitations. If you need to justify a lean plan at work, you might say, we're intentionally narrowing the scope to achieve a crisp, testable outcome. A quick listening check: despite the tight deadline, the team delivered ahead of schedule. The adverb despite flips the expectation, ahead of schedule raises the bar. Note how the sentence compresses triumph without cheering noisily. If you want to echo that tone, avoid the exclamation mark and choose measured, confident words: exceeded expectations, delivered early, outperformed projections. Let's return to the craft of listening. Advanced comprehension involves hearing the layer beneath the layer. When someone says, it's not ideal, but we can make it work, they are inviting collaboration, not resignation. When a colleague says, I'm not married to this idea, they signal flexibility and openness to alternatives. Your response should mirror the spirit: let's iterate, we can refine, how about a lightweight pilot? Listening at C1 means mapping intent as well as content. Before we close, I want to model an extended, natural monologue that you can shadow in segments. Imagine you're telling a friend about a recent challenge and the mindset that helped you navigate it. Over the last few weeks, I've deliberately pursued activities that force me to be a beginner: pottery, cycling, and public speaking. I've discovered that the moment just before improvement can feel almost identical to the moment just before quitting. The hands shake, the mind narrows, and the story in my head turns dramatic. What helps me is shrinking the target until the next action becomes embarrassingly small. One more minute at the wheel. One more lamppost on the hill. One more sentence with a steady breath. The result isn't flashy, but it compounds. Day by day, hesitation gives way to rhythm, and rhythm turns into trust. I start to trust the process, trust my capacity to recover from errors, and trust that progress will arrive, not as a sudden victory, but as a quiet accumulation of choices. If you shadow that paragraph, pay attention to the internal rhyme and repetition: beginner, improvement, quitting, shake, narrows, dramatic, trust, recover, progress. Repetition is not laziness, it's a rhetorical tool that creates cohesion and helps your listener track the thread. To finish, let me leave you with a simple practice loop you can adopt this week without rearranging your life. Each morning, choose a microstory from the previous day, a conversation, a decision, a mistake, or a small success. Tell it aloud in 3 phases, set the scene in 2 sentences, describe the tension in 2 sentences, offer the outcome and the lesson in 2 sentences. Record yourself once without notes, then again after listening back and identifying a single improvement target, perhaps slower pace, cleaner verbs, or clearer endings. In the evening, repeat the same story to a different audience. Your reflection in the mirror is fine, using one new phrase you picked up today, like pivot gracefully, hold the room, or break the task into manageable steps. The goal isn't to sound perfect, the goal is to sound present, precise, and alive in the language. Thank you for listening with such attention. If today's stories and expressions resonated with you, replay the sections that felt slightly out of reach and shadow them line by line. Your ear gets smarter with practice, your voice grows confident by showing up. This is Daily English Voices. I'm Mia, and I'm proud of the small, steady work you're doing. Keep going, 1 more minute, 1 more sentence, 1 more step, and I'll meet you here again for our next C1 session.